Welcome back. In our previous video, we talked about some very basic tools that a new modeler just getting started in the hobby would need to start building. And we wanted to put a little more meat on those bones and go over some more of those tools a little more in depth and talk about tools that are a little more advanced, perhaps a little more expensive, and just some of the options that are out there for modelers to use to build their models. The first thing we talked about was cement. The Testors tube cement. There's been other brands that have this. Revell, Pactra, Humbrol, I think, has had some tube cement. This is basically a gel. And when you're using this type of cement, you are making kind of a plastic cement plastic sandwich. So if you see these two halves of this fuselage, if you were to apply that cement on here, that cement would always be there. So when you put these together and you clamp them and let them dry, there's always going to be that cement between the plastic. That's different when you look at some other cements. But let me go down the line here with maybe some Testors product. This is in my estimation, probably a thinned out version of the tube cement. It works really well. I enjoy using it. But once again, this doesn't fully evaporate. So you're still going to have a plastic glue, plastic sandwich. When you get into the liquid cements, now this one, don't mean to mess you up, but inside of this bottle is actually some Testors liquid cement. I just like this bottle better. The Tamiya's applicator is much finer. And this is kind of a medium to fast drying cement. It evaporates completely after the cement has been applied to the plastic. So unlike these two glues where you apply it to the surface of the model and you put the model together, where these glues are always going to be present there, the liquid cements tend to evaporate either partially or completely. So there's a brush applicator inside of here, and as you put that glue onto that surface and put your mating surfaces together, eventually that cement will evaporate and only leave a weld as it softened the plastic. So you squeeze these together, you'll get some molten plastic in there, and it's just like a weld. The thinner of these types of cement, say this one from Tamiya says extra thin cement, you can actually put the halves, your pieces together, and just touch the brush to that, and capillary action will take that little drop of cement and allow it to run down that seam. It's kind of a neat way to put these things together. Now, it's a very hot cement in that it's going to melt this plastic and give you that little molten plastic weld bead in there. And if you can get enough of it to squeeze out, it's actually a wonderful way to fill that seam once that cement has evaporated and the molten plastic has dried. Another type of glue that we use is CA or super glue. CA is for cyanoacrylate. This type of glue, like the Testors cement, will always be there. It doesn't evaporate. It just gets hard. It's a wonderful glue. I use it for tacking things in place sometimes when I want to go back and use the liquid cements. You can also accelerate the drying time with what some people call, or some brands call, Zip Kicker. This is called Instastat. This is from Bob Smith Industries. This glue comes in different viscosities. This one is a medium. This is a thin. And when they say thin, they mean it. That stuff will run all over the place. It glues your fingers as good as it does plastic. Maybe that's a little better. A lot of different brands of cyanoacrylate. Once again, there are some, like Zap will make one called PlastaZap, and it's formulated specifically for plastic models. They're very popular right now. There is a black CA glue. that people are using because you can see it better. This is clear. The black, if you pour this on here using it as a filler, you'll be able to see where it is and clean it up so you don't have to do a lot of sanding. One of the drawbacks to using this type of cement or glue is that it gets hard as a rock once it's cured. You have a tendency to kind of leave some of the super glue on there as you're sanding down the seam, as the plastic tends to be a little softer sometimes than the cured CA glue. So that can be kind of a drawback. But it has its place. Certainly if you're gluing together dissimilar materials, if you're gluing wood to plastic or resin to plastic or metal to plastic when using photo etch, that's when the CA glue really is the one you want to use. Another type of cement we have here that's very specialized is Testor's Clear Part cement. I use this a lot when I'm gluing clear parts like canopy frames or landing light lenses or that sort of thing, as it doesn't attack the plastic and it dries perfectly clear. You can even use this, say for instance you had a small scale jet airliner that had a bunch of little window porthole type of things where the passenger windows were. You can use this glue to fill in that little gap and it'll dry crystal clear and look like a window. The next thing we talked about in the last video was how to remove your parts from these runners. Some people call this sprue. It's actually not the right name for it. These little guys here are the sprues. These are called runners by most people, I suppose. What we talked about that was a better choice than twisting a part off of these runners is to use a set of nail clippers. They'll work. They don't always get into where you want to get them. Like right in here, it would work okay, but some other situations, like maybe there, it wouldn't work so good. A better option is going to be some sprue nippers. And there are a lot of different companies that make these guys, and they've even progressed over the years. Some have a different profile to the jaws. I picked this setup recently at a model show in Texas, and they are super sharp and they become my favorites. But still, these others do have a place, and they tend to be able to take these parts off the runners of the trees fairly cleanly, so they don't leave a whole lot of burr of plastic behind. So these are definitely a better choice than the nail clippers. However, whatever your budget is, using these is much superior to twisting a part off of the trees. The next item on our list of necessary tools in our first video was using a simple nail filing board. These guys are helpful. It's relatively rigid. You can see me flexing it. It stays pretty taut. It does a pretty good job of filing off the little piece of plastic, that little spur or burr that's left behind there. You can also use this when you are sanding some filler over a gap that's left behind when you put some parts together. But it's kind of limited in its use. There are all sorts of better ideas. These sanding sticks have a foam insert inside of it. Makes them kind of contour to whatever surface you're sanding. This even more so. You can bend it and it'll contour to compound curves. These guys are pretty neat in that they have a band of sandpaper around them that you can replace. See, it's spring-loaded right here. That allows you to replace that band with a sandpaper of different coarseness. So I've seen them from 1,000 all the way down to about 320. 1,000 being the finer of the grits, and they do a really good job. You can see they're pretty fine on this end and they're rounded on that end, so you have different contours to get in different cracks and crevices on your model. To go along with that are files. Now these files, some of them, like this one, are diamond impregnated, so they don't actually have cut teeth in them like a normal file would. You can see here's a round one, here's a flat one that's been bent, here's one that is in the shape of a triangle if you're looking at it cross view. Here's a round one that's bent. So all sorts of different types of files for different kinds of things. And I find the different profiles and configurations have become fairly indispensable to me as a model builder, as I use them a lot, especially when I'm scratch building things. So a good selection of files is almost a must if you're going to build a fairly varied array of models. The next thing we talked about was tweezers. Now these, as you can tell, are a fairly basic pair of tweezers designed more for plucking eyebrow hairs out or something similar. Not really a modeling tool, but in a pinch comes in awful handy. There are better choices. These are stainless steel, as those are, and they have a very fine point to them, and they are very helpful when you're gluing small, tiny parts together. And they come in different sizes with different configurations on the tips. Some have a bent tip like this one, which can get into certain areas. Say you're inside of a cockpit or something, and you need to reach down into a corner. It does a really good job of that. And some have a lock on it so that you can hold a piece in there and then slide this guy forward, and it holds it shut. This is kind of a variation on the same theme. That little slide will hold that guy shut. Then you have some that are built to be shut until you press on them to open them. These things come in super handy when I'm painting small parts. You can tell the schmutz on the end of this, that I've been using this and this and this to hold small parts when I paint them. The next thing we talked about was a hobby knife. This one here doesn't have a name on it, but it's in the form of an X-Acto. And of course, X-Acto, as you know, is a manufacturer's name like Ford or Chevy. But there are all sorts of companies that make these type of knives. I have a small collection of them in my toolbox that I've gathered over the years. And I've got about 30 more. And the blades come in all sorts of configurations. This is number 11 blade. I use that more than anything, of course. And this curved blade, I don't know the number, but it is a real handy type of thing, especially when you're trying to separate photo etch off of their little frets. So I use that quite a bit, and it's also great for scraping seams. You have this type of a knife that swivels, so it's made for cutting patterns. All sorts of different replacement blades are available, and it's good to have extras on hand in case you ever need to stop and put a sharp blade in. Modeling with a dull blade is no fun. It can also be dangerous, as these blades will skip and jump and end up right in your fingers. So lots of different blade configurations, lots of different knives. Some people like to use scalpels, and that's just a preference kind of thing. I've grown up using this type of knife, so that's what I've stuck with. But indispensable tool in model making. To go along with the knives, another very useful tool is a razor saw. This is known as a number 2 handle. For your razor saw, you want to have one that has the hole in it, not just a slot for a blade. And what the hole is for is to accept this end of a razor saw. These razor saws come with different depths of blades, as you can tell. And they're also listed by the number of teeth per inch. For our modeling purpose, we probably want to have more teeth per inch. That makes them finer. I don't know if you can see these teeth there, but there are some that get relatively coarse, which you could use for, say, wood. But these ultra fine ones are what we use for plastic quite a bit. It's easy to draw that across the part and get it not to hang up because of the multiple tiny cutting teeth that are on there. They're also super handy if you want to work with resin. As you can see, this thing is going to need to be a little toolbox, going to need to be removed from this molding block, and that's perfect use for this razor saw. They also make a little miter box, and you can tell this guy has been used a lot. So it has 90 and 45 degree cuts you can make. There are others that have the 30-60s on there as well, and some that are infinite in that the blade would be held inside of a little cradle that can move, and you can lock it in anywhere you want it. So razor saw is a pretty neat tool to have. To go along with the razor saws are also, I guess you would also consider them razor saws, but these are photo etched saws. Very thin, very tiny little teeth, and these come in all sorts of configurations. I use them a lot for rescribing panel lines. One like this that has that neat little French curve there is very handy. The round one, of course. And so they have lots of neat uses. You can saw very small parts apart with them, and they flex because they're photo etched, so you can get them to do things that those others that I showed you previously you might not be able to do. Another must-have for your toolbox are going to be pin vices. I'm not sure where that gets their name, but they're just holders for little tiny drill bits. And here's an index that'll hold size 61 through 80. But these guys have a little chuck that you can loosen up. It opens up as you loosen it, and you can pull that out. And most of these will have a double-sided chuck. That one closes down with a hole still showing. This one has a larger hole. And there are others that'll close down to nothing, that just has a little plus mark looking once you've got it all the way closed down. I think this might be one of those. As you pull that out, you can tell that you close this down and it'll go absolutely disappears just about. And the other end of this one has a little bigger hole. And then once again, there's also several different configurations of pin vise. They're relatively inexpensive. You can get electric ones. I don't typically use electric ones on plastic because of the speed of a lot of the rotary tools tends to melt the plastic before it cuts into it. These you turn simply with your hand. This is free spinning here, so you can put it in the palm of your hand and turn it, and it does a really good job of drilling really tiny holes right where you need them. That about does it for our tool showcase today, gang. I hope it might have, for some of you, opened your eyes a little bit to some of the tools that are available to you as a model builder. There's plenty more that I haven't shown that we'll get to in future videos, specifically more about scribing and painting and masking and those sorts of things. So look forward for those in the future. And thanks again for spending some time with us, and we'll see you again. Make sure you make time to get to that bench.